Mangwanani Mwandelepo Vukenjani Kleklas Dumelang Banave Africa. Welcome to Africa Good Morning, the news and current affairs show that remains your portal into Africa's most potent stories. You are joined by Ashwin Berry on Monday, the 29th of June, and later in the show, Mike Sichula will be joining us from Lusaka, Zambia to deliver the Zambia report. But prior to that, these are some of the stories we're looking at from broader Africa. Uganda military orders closure of leading independent media outlets. DR Congo files international court case against Rwanda over conflict. Burkina Faso ends diplomatic relations with France. Thousands rush to leave South Africa ahead of anti-immigrant protests. And yes, we know Bafana just got knocked out by Canada, but we are still celebrating a record 9 African nations reaching the World Cup knockout stage. DSTV285 GOTV 25 oneup2.com, Network Media Hub, and NTVAFRIKA.MY.NA. That is where you can always watch the show. My name is Ashwin Berry. Top stories shortly.
Namibia is a land of movement, with waves that never stop reaching forward. Here, adventure is not something we search for. It is something we are born into. In every corner of this country, creativity rises. From artists, from athletes, from dreamers. And when the world comes to explore Namibia, they discover something extraordinary. Because when sport moves people, creativity moves ideas, and tourism moves the world toward us. Something powerful happens. A platform where movement meets imagination, where industries connect, where opportunity grows, where Namibia's next chapter begins. Welcome to the Creative Sport Tourism Expo. Exhibit, partner, experience. Creative sport tourism.
Uganda's leading independent media group is under siege after the army chief, who is the son of President Yoweri Museveni, ordered the closure of TV stations, newspapers, and radio outlets. The Daily Monitor newspaper said armed soldiers were stationed outside its headquarters in the capital, Kampala, and that both Nation TV and Spark TV had been taken off air. The outlets are part of the Nation Media Group, one of the most influential media companies in East Africa. It remains unclear what led to the crackdown, but in posts on X, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba said, "I do not believe in free press." He also said, "I have the power in Uganda to shut down any media house I want to. I have had this power since 2017. This power was given to me by my great father, President Kaguta Museveni." NTV, Nation TV, and Daily Monitor are learning about it today. The press should be guided by cadres of the revolution, he said. Opposition and human rights groups accuse General Kainerugaba of being a central figure in a highly repressive regime led by his father. Supporters of the president and his family say they have guaranteed stability in Uganda and that the economy has improved under their rule. President Museveni, 81, is a former rebel leader who took power about 40 years ago and won a record 7th term in disputed elections in January. Now, here is a broadcast from Nation TV Kenya, also known as NTV Kenya, as they were talking about what transpired in Uganda.
Now, 11 days ago, NTV Uganda, our sister station, ran a feature asking a pointed question. Is General Muhoozi Kainerugaba above the law? Tonight, he appears to have answered. Uganda's Chief of Defense Forces and son of President Yoweri Museveni has ordered the indefinite shutdown of the Nation Media Group's entire Uganda operation. NTV Uganda, Spark TV, the Daily Monitor, KFM, Dembe FM, all dark tonight. Their premises under military siege, their managing director being hunted. The East African region's press bodies say this is one of the gravest assaults on media freedom in the region's recent history. Meanwhile, Nation Media Group Uganda has this evening released a statement.
NTV Weekend Edition this Saturday.
This was the last live news broadcast from NTV Uganda on Saturday evening. Just after midnight, soldiers moved on the Nation Media Group headquarters in Namuwongo, Kampala. By 5 a.m. Sunday morning, NTV Uganda and Spark TV had gone dark. KFM and Dembe FM fell silent. Staff inside were told no one enters and no one leaves. The orders did not come through Uganda's Communications Commission, nor through the Media Council established under the Press and Journalism Act. It came through X from a man in military uniform.
General Moses' X account feed reads like a thriller script.
Just over a week ago, NTV Uganda aired a feature asking whether General Muhoozi Kainerugaba had become Uganda's untouchable lawbreaker, examining his prolific and provocative social media posts, from threats against neighboring countries to remarks targeting opposition figures, and asking whether he had placed himself above the law. In a sequence of posts through the night and into Sunday, General Muhoozi announced, escalated, and celebrated the shutdown. At 1:02 Sunday morning, he said NTV and Monitor are being shut down from today. Minutes later, he says both NTV and Monitor will not reopen without my permission. By 9:47 a.m., he was explicit about where he believes his authority originates, writing that he had the power to shut down any media house in Uganda since 2017, a power given to him, in his words, by his father, the president. And by Sunday afternoon, as if to mock any notion of accountability, he posted that he had heard the closures were costing NMG $5 million a day and described that as, in his words, good news. But what does...
So that's the report from Nation TV Kenya about what transpired at Nation TV Uganda. And if you want to know what we at Network Television think about that, do make sure you watch Second Take this coming Sunday at 9 p.m. DSTV285 GOTV 25, oneup2.com and Network Media Hub, as well as NTVAFRIKA.MY.NA, as I shall be giving a political, analytical, and possibly satirical take on those happenings. Now, we move over to more serious business. We are in DR Congo, as the Democratic Republic of Congo has filed a case against Rwanda at the International Court of Justice, accusing its neighbor of breaching multiple international treaties. In a statement, DR Congo said Rwanda had dispatched forces and backed armed groups to carry out unlawful military operations on its territory following the 1994 Rwandan genocide. Congolese Justice Minister Jilaume Andali said the country is seeking accountability for alleged breaches of conventions covering genocide prevention, racial discrimination, women's rights, and torture. Rwanda has not yet responded to the filing, but has long dismissed evidence that it backs rebel groups in DR Congo. UN experts in Western governments are among those who say Rwanda supports the M23 armed group in eastern DR Congo. Burkina Faso's military junta has broken off ties with France, accusing Paris of persistently acting against its national interests. Relations between Burkina Faso and its former colonial ruler worsened after Captain Ibrahim Traoré seized power in a coup in 2022 and pursued largely anti-Western policies. In a televised statement, Communications Minister Ping Duende Gilbert Ouedraogo said France was guilty of ceaseless activism against his country and accused it of neo-colonial ambitions. The French Foreign Ministry described the decision as hostile and unfounded and said it illustrated the troubling drift by the Burkinabe government. France also urged its nationals in the country to exercise heightened vigilance. Soon after taking power, Captain Traoré expelled French troops and his government accuse France of having a secret agenda while pivoting towards China and Russia. Now, thousands of Malawian citizens, migrants, queued for processing at a makeshift camp in Durban, while hundreds of Zimbabweans slept outside their consulate in Cape Town, hoping to leave South Africa before nationwide anti-immigrant protests tomorrow. Anti-immigrant groups have set June 30 as a deadline for undocumented migrants to leave. Police have been deployed as several cities prepare for possible unrest, while the government has appealed to citizens not to enforce immigration laws themselves. Acting KwaZulu-Natal Police Commissioner Phumelele Makoba urged marchers to respect the police, while President Cyril Ramaphosa said the security forces were ready. March and March said it was not calling for violence but would not take responsibility for anything that happens on June 30. Mozambique, Malawi and Zimbabwe have been repatriating citizens by bus, although demand has exceeded capacity. Now, we know that the acting commissioner of police in South Africa did say that should any violence stem from these marches, the leaders of the movements March on March and Operation Dudula will be held liable, especially civilly. Now, we know that sadly South Africa bowed out of the World Cup last night due to a loss to Canada. However, we have to talk about the fact that African teams have made history, with 9 of the 10 African nations in the 2026 World Cup advancing to the knockout stage after the Democratic Republic of Congo defeated Uzbekistan 3-1 and Algeria drew 3-3 with Austria. Morocco, South Africa, Senegal, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Cape Verde, Egypt, Congo and Algeria have all reached the round of 32, with Tunisia the only African side eliminated. Morocco and South Africa were the first African teams to qualify, while South Africa advanced to the knockout stage for the first time in their history. Cape Verde finished second in Group H ahead of Uruguay and Saudi Arabia during their debut World Cup campaign. Forward Fiston Mayele described DR Congo's qualification as historic for the country after the team's first World Cup victory and first knockout appearance. All right, those have been our top stories on Africa Good Morning. We're going to have a look at the weather before Mike Sichula joins us from Zambia. In a world where politicians promise the moon and deliver potholes, where democracy sometimes arrives in camouflage and ballots often look like formalities, one show dares to laugh with Africa, at Africa, and sometimes for Africa. This is Second Take, your weekly dose of political satire with an African soul and a global edge. From coups disguised as press briefings to ministers moonwalking past accountability, we serve the real news with sharper writing. Each week we bring you the TikTok of the week, because sometimes the revolution is vertical, and the heartwarming moment of the week to remind us that not everything is burning. We also sit down with the bold, the brilliant, and the brave, voices that question power, stir thought, and spark laughter. Because when the headlines are wild, the leaders are louder, and the truth is lost in translation, we all need a second take. A little bit of an issue there with the weather. We can tell you that in Windhoek it is cold, but stay tuned to NTV Broadcasting to check out the weather as the day continues. Now, we're going to be joined by Mr. Mike Sichula as he delivers the Zambia report. Mike, Budiwanji. All right, it seems like we're having connectivity issues with Mr. Mike Sichula, but I will go ahead and get into his first story because it is a significant one. President Hakainde Hichilema has officially launched his election campaign. Now, this is ahead of Zambia's 13 August 2026 general elections after the governing United Party for National Development unveiled its 2026 election team during a rally at Hero Stadium in Lusaka. Held under the theme Zambia Forward Together, the campaign launch outlined the party's vision of building on the current government's programs and development agenda. The UPND pledged to continue implementing free education and the Cash for Work program while accelerating growth in the mining sector, increasing agricultural production and creating jobs on a larger scale, particularly for young people. President Hichilema's campaign message centered on sustaining economic reforms and expanding opportunities across key sectors as the country heads towards the August polls. The launch officially signals the start of the president's re-election campaign, with the party positioning continuity, economic growth and youth empowerment as central pillars of its manifesto ahead of the nationwide vote. And you notice there, Yo Maps, the biggest music artist in Zambia, was at the president's rally, which is interesting because he formerly campaigned for Edgar Chagwa Lungu, Zambia's former president, who, as you know, will now be buried in South Africa after a year of court battles between the government and the family. Now, in the last of the stories from Zambia that we are going to be covering in the absence of Mr. Mike Sichula, weather experts have forecast El Nino conditions during Zambia's 2026-2027 farming season, raising concerns about the potential impact on agricultural production. In response, the Ministry of Agriculture has developed a comprehensive agriculture and food security cluster response framework aimed at strengthening the country's preparedness and protecting national food security. The framework is designed to coordinate government interventions and improve resilience against climate-related shocks affecting the agriculture sector. As part of its adaptation strategy, the ministry has also developed climate-smart crop varieties suited to Zambia's different agroecological regions to help farmers cope with changing weather patterns and improve productivity under challenging conditions. The measures form part of broader efforts to minimize the effects of anticipated dry conditions, support farming communities, and maintain stable food production during the coming agricultural season. All right, so we're going to go ahead and close off the show with more agriculture because we are swinging over to economic news in South Africa, where in a video posted on his X page, agricultural economist Wandile Sihlobo highlights South Africa's latest crop estimates, noting that the country is set to record its largest summer grain and oilseed harvest on record. Now, he says production estimates have been lifted consistently over the past months, supported by an expansion in the area under cultivation and high yields resulting from favorable La Nina summer rains. Referring to data released by the Crop Estimates Committee, Sihlobo states that South Africa's 2025 to 2026 summer grain and oilseed harvest is now estimated at 21.49 million tons. Okay, so just before we introduce to Mr. Wandile Sihlobo's video from his X page breaking down what we just introduced, we're going to go ahead and say goodbye on DSTV285 GOTV 25 oneup2.com, Network Media Hub, and NTVAFRIKA.MY.NA. Tomorrow, we will return with the Zimbabwe report, where we know that the CAB 3 bill, the Constitutional Amendment 3 bill, has been passed by Senate. From my understanding, it's just waiting for the president's signature. From me, Ashwin Mbere, and the Africa Good Morning team, we say Swedash Zakanaka, leaving you with Wandile Sihlobo's post from his X page on South Africa's grain and oilseed harvest.
Folks, for months now, we've been writing about the excellent summer grain and oilseeds harvest that South Africa is expecting. And today, the 25th of June, 2026, the Crop Estimate Committee of South Africa just came out with a further upward revision. They now estimate that South Africa will likely have 21.5 million tons of grain and oilseeds. This is the largest grain harvest on record, and we see upward revision across all major grains: maize, soybean, sunflower seeds, sorghum, and the likes. And in fact, if you zoom into maize, which is the major staple grain in South Africa, we're expecting to have about 17.3 million tons of maize. As a country, we consume about 12 million tons of maize. So expectations of 17.3 million tons already tell you that we'll have enough for ourselves, for exports, and still start the new season with ample supplies. And we also have to keep in mind that this harvest is coming into season right now at the time where we also had large stocks from the previous season, because the previous season we were hoping that we would export large volumes of maize And in fact, the export forecast at the time, this is the season that ended in April of this year. We're expecting to export about 2.4 million tons, which was a conservative figure, but we ended up exporting only 2 million tons. So there are large carryover stocks. And on top of that, there is this 17.3 million tons of maize that we are expecting. Soybean is also a record crop. I'm looking at the data now. It's about 3 million tons of soybean that is expected this year. It's the largest soybean ever. And the key catalyst behind all of this is the expansion in area plantings, but also just favorable La Nina rainfall, and of course the farmers' efforts and the better seed cultivars that we are using. But the bottom point that we are receiving in all of this data is that South Africa is having its largest grain and oilseeds on record for the 2025-26 production season. We already see this adding downward pressure on prices. Again, if you look at maize prices, they are down by anywhere between 20 to 30%, depending on a day where you're looking at these prices. Soybean prices are down by anywhere between 10 to 15%. And our expectations is that for the next couple of weeks or months or so, you're likely going to see grain prices remaining under pressure because of these large supplies. And of course, in as far as the exports, we are now also starting to see new countries that have not been present, at least over the past season. They were present in the past. They are coming back now in the Far East markets, buying South African maize, the likes of Vietnam, South Korea, and the others. We hope that Japan and the others that also typically import yellow maize from South Africa, they will come in and buy, because our maize is affordable, but it's also of better quality. In as far as the harvest, the farmers have progressed. And in fact, if you look at soybean, sunflower seeds, the harvest is nearly complete. But for maize, the harvest is still at the early stages. I mean, right now, the farmers have delivered to the commercial silos just under 5 million tons of maize. Remember, we're expecting, again, a crop of about 17.3 million tons. That means that there's still a lot more work to happen. So we are ending this year really on a high note in as far as the maize supplies and the grain supplies in South Africa. We have one of the best years. But of course, the large volume of production does not always mean that farmers are in a better financial conditions. If anything, given that the input costs when the folks went out to plant were reasonably higher, and the commodity prices now are under pressure because of these large supplies. And there are large supplies not only here, by the way, just globally. There are generally large grain and oilseed supplies. So this is adding pressure on the prices. So profitability-wise, there is some pressure that is there in the farmers. But this is also something to think about when you considering the food price inflation in South Africa. We've seen, for example, that if you look at the May figures of food price inflation in our country, they were at the lowest level in 17 months. I'm looking at the numbers now. In May, food price inflation in the country was at 1.6%. That's the rate at which food prices are increasing. Of course, it was not down only because of grain-related stuff. I mean, vegetables and fruits are actually in deflation because we have excellent harvest also there, thanks to the favorable weather conditions, farmers' efforts, better cultivars, and all the efforts that people make in the farm. So there is that part of the story. But the core point is that now with this harvest consistently being lifted, one gets a sense that then we will be sitting at this space whereby consumer food price inflation, at least in 2026, may remain contained. You may see it edging up towards Q4 this year, but still remain fairly contained. And again, when I talk about this, I'm not saying everything is getting cheaper. I mean, food price inflation, after all, is just the rate at which food prices are changing. There are some products that are in deflation and others are just increasing at a slower pace. But this is a good figures that we're looking at here.